Every plant lover has faced this puzzle at some point. Why won't my plants bloom? We all crave a garden bursting with vibrant colors and fragrant blossoms, but sometimes our green friends refuse to put on a show. Blooming isn't just about aesthetics, it's a sign of a healthy, happy plant. So, what goes wrong when buds fail to open? What secret language are the plants speaking, and how can we understand it? Today we unravel the mystery behind non-blooming plants and how to fix it. So, what's keeping your garden from bursting into a riot of colors? Let's dive in. First off, let's talk about light exposure. Plants are like sunbathers. They love a good dose of sunshine. But not all plants need the same amount of light. Some plants, like roses and sunflowers, thrive under direct sunlight, while others, like hydrangeas and begonias, prefer a bit of shade. So if your plants are not blooming, it could be because they're not getting the right amount of light they need. Remember, the key here is to understand the sun-loving or shade-loving nature of your plants and place them accordingly. Next up, watering habits. Water is to plants what air is to us, essential. But too much or too little of it can be harmful. Overwatering can lead to root rot, while underwatering can cause your plants to dry out. Both scenarios can prevent your plants from blooming. The trick is to water just right. And how do you do that? Well, a general rule of thumb is to water your plants when the top 1 inch of soil feels dry to the touch. Now let's talk about nutrient balance. Just like we need a balanced diet to stay healthy, plants need a balanced supply of nutrients to bloom. The big three, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, are critical for plant growth. Nitrogen helps with leaf growth, phosphorus is important for root and flower development, and potassium aids in overall plant health. If your plants are not blooming, they might be lacking one or more of these essential nutrients. A good quality fertilizer can help correct this imbalance and get your plants back on their blooming track. But there's more to it than just light, water, and nutrients. Let's dig a little deeper. Sometimes the reasons for non-blooming can be less obvious. We've already talked about light, water, and nutrients, but what about other factors? Let's dive in. First up, we have pruning mistakes. Yes, pruning. It's not just about keeping your plants neat, it's about encouraging growth. Pruning at the wrong time or cutting off too much can result in a lack of blooms. For instance, if you prune spring flowering plants in late winter, you're likely removing the buds set to bloom in a few months. Timing is crucial, and so is technique. Prune your plants appropriately, and they'll reward you with blossoms aplenty. Next, we have plant age. Plants, like people, have life stages. Some plants simply aren't mature enough to bloom. Patience is key here. A rose bush, for example, might take 2 to 3 years to fully establish itself and start blooming. So if your plant is young, give it time. It's growing, maturing, and when it's ready, it will bloom. Finally, environmental stress. Plants are sensitive to their surroundings. Changes in temperature, pests, diseases, these can all cause stress to your plants and hinder blooming. Sudden cold snaps can damage buds. Pests can eat away at your plant's resources. Diseases can weaken your plant. Keep a close eye on your plants and their environment. If you notice a sudden change, it's time to investigate and address the issue. Remember, plants are not just living things. They're survivors. They've adapted to endure harsh conditions, but sometimes they need a little help from us. By understanding their needs and the problems they face, we can better care for them. Recognizing these problems is half the battle won. Now let's move on to the solutions. Now that we know what's wrong, how do we set it right? First off, light exposure. Plants are like us, they need sunlight to thrive. Too little and they might not bloom. Too much and they could get sunburned. The solution: find the sweet spot. Some plants need full sun while others prefer partial shade. Do some research on your specific plant's needs and adjust their location accordingly. If you're growing indoors, you might consider investing in some grow lights. They can provide the necessary light spectrum for your plants to photosynthesize properly. Next up, watering habits. Water is essential for plants, but too much or too little can be detrimental. The key is consistency. Most plants prefer a good soak, then a period of dryness until the next watering. This cycle helps the roots breathe and absorb nutrients effectively. Remember, the amount of water required depends on the plant type, size, and environment. A moisture meter can be a helpful tool in determining when it's time to water. Now let's talk nutrients. Just like us, plants need a balanced diet to bloom. They need a mix of macronutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and micronutrients like iron, manganese, and zinc. Too much of one can cause a deficiency of another, leading to non-blooming. The solution? Use a balanced fertilizer. You can find numerous options at your local garden center. Make sure to follow the instructions on the label, as over-fertilization can harm your plants. And what about those plants that are getting enough light, water, and nutrients but still refuse to bloom? Well, they might be missing some essential trace elements. These elements like boron, copper, and molybdenum are needed in very small amounts, but they're crucial for plant health and blooming. You can usually find these in a complete plant fertilizer or apply them separately if needed. Great progress, but we're not done yet. Let's tackle the remaining issues. Pruning mistakes, plant age, and environmental stress can be trickier to handle, but don't worry, we've got you covered. First up, let's tackle pruning. It's kind of like a haircut for your plants. Done right, it encourages healthy growth and, yes, more blooms. The key is timing. For spring bloomers, prune right after they've finished their show. For the summer bloomers, a late winter or early spring trim should do the trick. And remember, less is more. Over-pruning can do more harm than good. Next, let's talk about plant age. Just like us, plants have a certain maturity age before they start blooming. Some might take a season, others several years. So if your plant's still in its juvenile phase, give it some time. Patience is a virtue in the gardening world. Last but not least, environmental stress. This can be anything from pests and diseases to extreme weather conditions. The solution? Prevention is better than cure. Regularly check your plants for signs of infestation or disease. A simple homemade insecticidal soap spray can work wonders. And don't forget about mulch. It helps regulate soil temperature and retain moisture, creating a stable environment for your plants to thrive in. For those living in areas with extreme weather, consider creating a microclimate. This can be as simple as providing shade during hot summers or using a frost blanket during cold snaps. The key is to mimic the plant's natural habitat as much as possible. Remember, every plant is unique. What works for one might not work for another. It's all about understanding your plant's specific needs and creating an environment where it can flourish. With these tips in your gardening arsenal, a blooming garden is within your reach. Let's recap what we've learned today. Blooming is not just about aesthetics, it's a sign of a healthy plant. If your plants aren't blooming, there could be several reasons why. The first thing to check is light exposure. Plants need just the right amount of sunlight to bloom. Too much or too little can hinder their growth. Next, examine your watering habits. Remember, overwatering and underwatering can both lead to non-blooming. Nutrient balance is another crucial aspect. Plants require a balanced diet of nutrients to bloom, so ensure your fertilizers are up to the task. If all is well in the nutrient department, consider your pruning practices. Incorrect pruning can lead to a lack of blooms. Don't forget about the plant's age. Some plants just need time to mature before they start blooming. Finally, watch out for environmental stress. Pests, diseases, and extreme weather conditions can all prevent your plants from blooming. The solutions? Adjust your plant's light exposure, water adequately, balance your plant's nutrients, prune correctly, and provide a conducive environment for growth. Remember, each plant is unique. What works for one might not work for another. Understanding your plant's needs and responding accordingly is the key to a blooming garden. With patience, care, and these tips, your garden will soon be a blooming paradise. Don't forget to subscribe for more gardening advice. Happy gardening!